5 books to better understand people. Book number 1, Why We Buy. When I read this book, I never studied consumer psychology before, so a lot of this stuff is quite shocking to me. For example, the time you spend in the parking lot can significantly impact your consumer purchases. If you're in a parking lot and you're walking really quickly, it takes time for your body to slow down, your heart rate to slow down, and so you're less likely to notice things in the front of the store because you're still going quickly, your eyes are adjusting from the brightness, and you're kind of mentally alert when you're in the parking lot, you're not in a good mood. But when you get into the store, you need to slow down because they're going to put a lot of important things in the front of the store. So people who specialize in consumer psychology actually think about things like the parking lot and how that influences purchasing behavior. Book number 2, The Psychology of Persuasion. I think this book is super important, not just for understanding marketing and sales, because a lot of marketing and sales people read this book, but also for understanding people in general. There's a lot of interesting persuasion techniques, many of which take place in routine, like ordinary, mundane life, that you should understand. A good example of this was they had American soldiers in a prison. They were prisoners of war, and they were forced to write essays about the virtues of communism. And when they came back, these soldiers still held positive sentiments about communism, despite the fact that they didn't agree with it. And it's because they were forced to write essays about the virtues of communism. The same thing holds true if you sign your signature on something that states a certain thing, you're more likely to agree with that statement. If you argue for a certain belief, even if you don't believe it, you're more likely to accept that belief. There are a lot of persuasion tricks that are used in ordinary life that you should understand. Book number 3, Boundaries. This is another really, really important book for not only understanding people, but also for your own mental health. Boundaries are really important because you want to not let people step into certain areas of your life, right? Like if you're a professor and you have a lot of students who are eager to learn from you or learn about you, it's really important to not let them chew up your time. And you might want to spend time learning with them and talking with them, but it's important to not let them chew up your time, and so you have to learn how to set a boundary there. The same thing goes if you're a medical doctor and you need to learn how to set boundaries with your patients, or even with your friends. Sometimes you want to set boundaries with your friends so that they don't know everything about you or they're not in every aspect of your life. And this book is really, really good for that. It's going to teach you that setting boundaries is super important and how to set them. Book number 4, Attached. This book I think is super good for understanding people because it's going to talk about attachment styles. I remember when I first learned about attachment styles that you could it was a very good way to analyze people and just determine whether they were anxious people or not. Because, for example, someone who has an anxious attachment style, right? They're very nervous about what their partner's doing, what the partner thinks about them, will constantly demand text messages. If the person doesn't respond to them right away, they'll get anxious about it. If the person has to go and do something and they're physically separated, they kind of get a separation anxiety. This book will be super useful for understanding how people relate to one another or their kind of romantic relationships, but also even their parental relationships and their relationships with their friends, right? Many of us have this friend who they're not invited to a particular outing. Let's say there's a group of 3 people and only 2 of you want to hang out. The anxious person in that group, the third person, will kind of take offense to that maybe. And so you can understand these kind of dynamics through reading about attachment styles. Book number 5, The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It's, I think, not necessarily good for understanding everyday actions, although the book will provide explanations for everyday actions. I think he talks about the study where adopted children were more likely to be abused by their non-biological parents, whereas children who have their biological parents are less likely to be adopted. So there's an evolutionary explanation there because of the shared genes. But that's not what this book is about. This book is really more about providing a meta theory for human behavior. It's not so much interested in explaining and analyzing human behavior, but understanding the why this kind of behavior happens, right? Why is this behavior happening? Why do people do this? Why do humans do this? I would say for that reason, this book is a good meta theory book for understanding human behavior. So those are my 5 books for better understanding humans. Let me know what you think. That being said, ciao.